Okay, imagine someone who's just as into, say, liquor and sex as they are into deep meditation and creating art. Seems like a walking contradiction, right?
Yeah. But that's kind of the fascinating thing about Gideon Chopel.
Exactly, that paradox.
He really wasn't afraid to, embrace it all. The whole spectrum makes him incredibly compelling.
And that's what we're digging into today. You've brought us these excerpts from Tibetan arts of love, sex, orgasm, and spiritual healing.
That's right.
So we're going to use this material for a deep dive into this, well, provocative Tibetan thinker. We want to unpack his ideas on philosophy, his explorations of eroticism, even some really modern-sounding social commentary. Listeners should brace for some potential aha moments, I think.
Definitely. It gives us this amazing window into a mind that just didn't follow the usual tracks.
Okay, so Gendun Chopel wasn't just like dabbling around. He was a serious intellectual figure.
Oh, absolutely.
He was in Kalimpong, working with Tarchin Babullah on a Tibetan English dictionary.
Right, and that wasn't just about words, was it?
No, it sounds like it was a real hub for young Tibetans looking for new ideas. People like Rapka Bomdatsang.
Yeah.
Wasn't he the one who translated Sun Yat-sen?
He was. So Gedin Chopel was plugged into these, well, reformist currents. He wasn't just off in his own world.
Right. Then later, back in Lhasa, he works with Chodrak on another dictionary, a modern Tibetan one.
And got support from the Horkang family, too.
Which led to White Annals getting published in early Tibetan history.
Mm-hmm. And there were apparently other histories on India and Ceylon, but they seem to be lost, unfortunately.
Such a shame. But back in Lhasa, things got interesting. He started teaching Madhyamaka philosophy in a way that ruffled some feathers.
Yeah, this is where you really see him pushing boundaries. His student, Dawasang Bo, documented these teachings.
In that text, the ornament for the thought of Nagarjuna.
Exactly. And it was a direct challenge to the dominant Gelugpa school, specifically to Donkaba's interpretation.
And he knew it would be controversial.
Oh, yeah. He apparently warned his student, like, this might cause some trouble. So the key thing here is he wasn't just accepting the philosophical status quo, he was actively questioning it, reworking it.
And it wasn't all just dry theory, either. There's that great anecdote.
About Geshe Gelden finding him.
Yeah. Chopel was apparently, well, drunk,
Mm.
but invited Gelden in and just laid out his understanding of Madhyamaka with, like, total clarity.
It's an amazing story, isn't it? It shows this deep, almost intuitive grasp he had, regardless of, his state.
So what was the core disagreement,
Yeah.
philosophically speaking, between him and Donkaba?
Okay, so his main critique was that Jonkaba's approach felt, well, overly subtle, too focused on fine intellectual distinctions.
Like what specifically?
Specifically, this difference between just plain existence and what's called inherent existence.
Okay.
Jean-Kaba argued you had to really grasp this idea of inherent existence, things existing independently from their own side before you could properly meditate on emptiness, which is the lack of that inherent existence.
So understanding the thing you're trying to negate first, like a prerequisite.
Kind of, yeah, like identifying the target before you shoot. He saw understanding inherent existence as sort of the crucial first conceptual step.
Okay, I think I get that. So where did Gideon Chopel diverge?
Well, Gideon Chopel basically said, look, the emphasis should be on experiencing emptiness directly.
Ah,
He thought you needed to refute all phenomena, pots, pillars, existence itself directly through your own experience, rather than getting bogged down in analyzing this specific concept of inherent existence.
so less intellectual dissection, more direct realization.
Precisely. And actually, he found common ground there with the Nyingma school and even some Geluk scholars who preferred a more direct path.
Like that analogy you mentioned.
Yeah, from Jenga Rolbe Dorje about searching for a horn-like thing to refute. Like, why invent this abstract concept just so you can knock it down?
Makes sense.
So the big insight is Chopel prioritizing that hands-on experiential understanding over the purely intellectual framework.
Got it. Direct realization over conceptual analysis.
And he didn't stop there. He also questioned the Gelugpa reliance on the law of the excluded middle.
You mean the idea that something is either A or not A? No gray areas?
Exactly that. He argued that ultimate reality actually transcends those kinds of binary dualistic propositions.
Okay.
He even hints at this in the Treatise on Passion, talking about how things like emptiness and bliss, which seem opposite, can actually coexist.
So reality is more complex than simple either or logic allows.
That was his view. Another key takeaway. Reality for him was beyond those neat categories.
This really paints him as someone pushing philosophical boundaries. Now, shifting gears slightly, the source mentions his political views too,
Yeah, briefly. While he was in India, he definitely had contact with some Tibetan political leaders in exile.
like Rapka Bomdasang again.
Right, who was involved with that Association for Improvement of Western Tibet. So it shows his interests weren't purely religious or philosophical. He was engaged with the political scene too.
Right. Okay, now let's get into the really unique part of this deep dive. His exploration of erotic texts. The treatise on passion draws heavily on Indian sources, doesn't it?
Oh, massively. And the breadth is fascinating. He mentions what people think is Kshemendra's Arts of Passion,
Okay.
but he really singles out two as the best. Vatsyayana's Kama Sutra, which everyone knows,
Of course.
and Maheshvara's Treatise on Desire, which might be a text called the Ragashakara.
Maheshwaras. I haven't heard of that one as much.
And that's the thing, it's kind of mysterious. He rates it super highly, but it doesn't seem to have been well known among Indian scholars later on. A bit of a puzzle?
Like a lost classic, maybe?
Could be. So the point is, he was drawing on this really rich, diverse tradition of Indian erotic thought.
Interesting. And he mentions Mandikeshvara, too, in relation to classifying women.
Yes, he suggests Nandi Keshvara's views might have influenced his own fourfold system for classifying women, which you also find in the Ratirasya.
But his system for men is different.
Right. He has 4 types of men, whereas the Kama Sutra famously has 3. It just highlights how his own treatise is this unique blend. He's taking things, but also adding his own spin.
Synthesizing, not just copying.
Exactly. He also mentions King Virabhadra's crest jewel of the god of passion.
Which was the Kama Sutra in verse.
Essentially, yeah. And then there's this really intriguing mention of a possible treatise by Nagarjuna himself.
The philosopher Nagarjuna on sexual pleasure.
Apparently. Supposedly covering things like astrology and prenatal influences. Wild, right?
Wow.
And finally, Sarupa's brief treatise on passion. So, yeah, he was really immersed in this stuff.
Clearly dove deep. And his own descriptions, say, of the 64 arts of love, they sound much more detailed, maybe more explicit than others, like Mipam.
That's a really key difference. His section on the 8 embraces is like twice as long as Mipam's.
Really?
Yeah, and the 8 kisses, way more extensive.
Yeah.
He even brings in these Indian ideas about inner fluids shifting with the moon cycle to give specific advice on when and where to kiss.
That's specific.
Oh, yeah. And things like pinching and scratching, he goes into much more detail, gives them more context within lovemaking.
So a much more sensual, detailed, almost practical exploration compared to some contemporary.
I think that's fair to say. Definitely more elaborate.
Okay. Now, one of the most striking things in the treatise, especially for its time, is this recurring theme of the equality of women. Can you unpack that a bit?
Yes, this is truly remarkable. You know, even though the text feels a bit fragmented sometimes, this idea just keeps coming back.
How so?
Well, he directly attacks the hypocrisy he sees, like the Persian custom he mentions, where adulterous wives were killed but men could have multiple young wives. He just points out the blatant imbalance and questions the whole basis for it.
Challenging those double standards head on.
Absolutely. He paints this picture of a wife, a female companion, as being incredibly valuable in a world that's full of suffering. He lists these 6 goddess-like qualities.
What are they again?
Pleasure bringer, family builder, nurse, poet, servant, and friend. So this directly counters any narrative about women being inherently unstable or unfaithful. He even mocks customs condemning female adultery but not male, saying these come from non-Buddhist views that create these artificial clean, dirty divides.
He sounds like he was really swimming against the current of his time's social and religious attitudes.
He really was. He takes on the Brahminical rules against widows remarrying. He links their supposed uncleanliness to the thankfully abandoned practice of sati.
Where widows were burned on the husband's pyre.
Right. He even cites the Kalachakra Tantra on how Brahmins supposedly treat their wives. And, maybe most significantly, he argues for a relativistic view on widow remarriage. Meaning he saw no logical reason to forbid it. He even saw benefits, especially for young widows overcome with grief. This flew directly in the face of strong Indian prohibitions at the time.
So a really progressive stance on women's rights, particularly for widows.
Definitely. It's about questioning tradition based on logic and compassion.
It seems his focus is consistently on fairness and, well, reality.
Yeah. I mean, he acknowledges the standard Buddhist view that adultery causes problems, negative karma.
Right.
But then he practically disagrees with the Kama Sutra, advising sleeping with wives of men who are far away. He points out the real-world problems, like potential pregnancy later on. His focus seems very much on genuine connection and avoiding actual harm.
Fascinating. Let's switch tracks again to another concept he discusses, this idea of regenerative fluid. How did he understand that?
He saw it as the absolute essence of blood. He uses these analogies like butter being the essence of milk or fire coming from rubbing sticks. It represents this concentrated vitality.
Okay.
And he warns against weakening it, through illness or sex with prostitutes. He connects a weakened fluid to lineage ending or unhealthy children.
It's interesting. Modern science also talks about ejaculate being more than just sperm, right? All
Yeah.
sorts of vital components.
Exactly. There's a curious resonance there between the ancient idea and modern understanding.
And he gets into that Indian debate about whether women have this fluid too.
Yes, and there was clearly disagreement back then. One view he mentions is that women secrete something similar, but maybe more slowly during sex, which was thought to explain why their pleasure could be greater or longer lasting.
Okay.
But Chopel himself seemed to lean towards thinking this slower secretion wasn't the same as the male regenerative fluid.
Ah.
That said, he definitely didn't dispute the intensity or duration of female orgasm. He just notes that different systems, sutras, tantras, followers of Babravia, had different takes on the whole female fluid question.
So no single agreed-upon view even then. A point of discussion.
Right. The key thing is realizing there wasn't one monolithic understanding of female sexuality back then either.
Good point. Okay, let's get back to the practical side. He offers a lot of advice on enhancing sexual pleasure. What are the main themes there?
His approach is really holistic. It's about stimulating the whole body, using imagination. He emphasizes areas usually ignored, calling them doors of passion. And he stresses various kinds of touch, gazing, biting, rubbing, sucking, what he calls the 9 places on the body. So the big takeaway is this full body, highly sensual approach.
Sounds very exploratory.
It does. He even describes a specific sequence for pinching during intercourse, starting at the neck and shoulders, moving down the body, ending at the spine during emission.
A specific technique.
Yeah, and he notes that pinching other places, like the upper ears or armpits, might actually hasten male ejaculation. He also lists 8 forms of pinching and scratching, noting their order and meaning might differ from the Kama Sutra.
So not just random acts, but potentially quite refined techniques for arousal.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
Part of the more nuanced way to build excitement.
And he really expands on sexual postures too, doesn't he? Way beyond the usual suspect.
Oh, absolutely. The Kama Sutra has 8 main ones, right?
Mm-hmm.
Chopel gives 20 and calls 8 of those fundamental.
20.
Yeah. He dedicates a whole chapter to them, actually replacing the Kama Sutra's chapter on oral sex, which he handles elsewhere.
Interesting restructuring.
And the names are quite descriptive, like the cowherd lying supine.
Which is missionary.
Right. But then you have rocking, pressing down, various standing positions. The sheer variety is the key insight here. He's really broadening the repertoire.
Some of the other names sound quite evocative.
Yeah.
Very powerful frog style, lustful pangs,
Yeah.
plow motion, intoxicating donkey style.
Hey, yeah, he really encourages experimentation. There's also motion of a bull, motion of a boar, each with specific movements described.
And he advises resting.
Yes, importantly, rest when tired, then resume until both partners are fully satisfied. The goal isn't just orgasm, it's profound, sustained pleasure. Mutual satisfaction.
Focus on the whole experience, not just the endpoint. He also talks about erotic noises, which sounds intriguing.
It is. His list seems inspired by the bird sounds in the Kama Sutra, but he goes further. He describes the sounds and the actions likely to produce them.
How so?
Well, unlike the Kama Sutra, which often links sounds to striking or hitting, Chopel seems to link them more to the sensation of penetration in different erotic spots, and he avoids depictions of violent lovemaking.
Can you give an example?
Sure. The voice of a pigeon is when the man slaps the woman's buttocks while she kisses him. The voice of a cuckoo is the cry when the head of the penis touches the deepest part of the womb.
Okay.
So it's a more nuanced connection between specific acts and the resulting sounds of pleasure. Less about aggression, more about sensation.
A less violent, more sensation-focused interpretation. And he also seems keen on challenging gender stereotypes within sex itself.
Yes, he explicitly states that both men and women have traits of the opposite sex. He encourages partners to recognize and sort of play with this during sex.
To break down rigid roles.
Seems like it. Trying to get beyond simple active male, passive female tropes. He also describes positions like going and coming or opposite method that suggest more mutual, less stereotyped action.
So encouraging fluidity and challenging fixed roles.
Exactly, a more dynamic approach.
Okay, what about some of the perhaps less conventional topics like rear entry or oral sex? How does he treat those?
He's actually quite positive about rear entry. He praises it for stimulating the labia effectively and bringing women great bliss.
Interesting.
He even makes methods of copulation, which is mostly rear entry stuff, the eighth of his 64 arts. That position is usually taken by oral sex in lists like the Kama Sutras.
So he swaps them. Where does he discuss oral sex then?
He puts oral sex under a separate category called uncertain acts.
Uncertain acts. Why uncertain?
It seems to group together things like oral sex and perhaps some tantric practices. He definitely encourages experimentation with oral sex, though. He notes it's common in the West and points to Indian temple carvings showing it was practiced historically there, too.
So not condemning it, just categorizing it differently.
Right. And he connects it to tantric practices for orgasm without emission, retaining the seminal fluid. He mentions the female sky travelers recommending this for highly passionate people.
So again, linking the physical act to his spiritual or esoteric practice.
Exactly. That's a recurring thread. Which brings us squarely to his views on sexual pleasure and spiritual insight. How does he connect these seemingly disparate realms?
Yeah, this seems really central to his treatise.
It really is. He sees the intense ecstasy of sex as a potential pathway to transformation, even to understanding ultimate reality. He emphasizes that reality is beyond our normal conceptual thinking.
And sex helps break through that.
That's the idea. The intensity of orgasm can, he suggests, temporarily melt away the nets of our concepts, opening up a non-conceptual, blissful clarity.
Wow. So using intense pleasure to glimpse a deeper reality.
That's the core insight. It's a radical idea of physical ecstasy as a window.
Bypassing the purely intellectual route.
Right. He draws on tantric ideas about how consciousness dissolves during orgasm, moving through stages of white, reed orange, black appearances.
Leading to the mind of clear light.
Exactly. And the ecstatic mind of great bliss, where normal perception just dissolves. He even talks about the 16 pleasures arising from the essential white fluid moving through the central channel in meditation, where each bliss realizes emptiness.
And he dedicates his book to this.
Yes, to those realizing this sky-like reality with profound pleasure. So the intense pleasure and mental focus withdraw the mind from its usual habits, potentially revealing that our ordinary way of seeing things as solid, inherently existing, is flawed. Sex becomes a potential spiritual practice.
It's suggesting the sheer intensity can shake up our usual mental frameworks.
Precisely. Now, traditional Tantra uses that subtle mind state to cultivate wisdom and compassion for liberation. Chopel seems to bridge the secular and religious more directly.
How so?
He suggests that pleasurable activities leading to intense consciousness can actually undermine desire itself through realizing emptiness. It's almost paradoxical. He knows the Gelukpa explanation of bliss and emptiness being indivisible, but objects to treating them as two separate things conceptually. He prefers emphasizing the self-arisen nature of bliss free from concepts, free from prejudice. He has verses praising this.
So less dualistic.
Yeah. While highest Yoga Tantra explicitly links compassion to using sexual bliss on the path, Chopel suggests the orgasm experience itself can yield a vision of reality. He encourages extending pleasure, breaking cultural taboos that limit it.
And he even gives practical tips for extending it.
Yes, advice on avoiding premature ejaculation, shifting mental focus away from the genitals, imagining the vastness of the sky.
Kendall techniques.
And physical ones too, contracting limbs, pulling in the stomach. It's all geared towards maximizing and deepening the experience.
So pleasure isn't just okay, it's potentially transformative. This all seems to build towards a specific ethic of love he outlines. What are its core principles?
Yeah, and it's notable he addresses his own past as a monk here. He's trying to frame natural desires. He doesn't shy away from describing the suffering of unfulfilled desire. He gets how powerful it is.
Acknowledging its force.
Right. And while some descriptions of restraint are stark, his main point seems to be respecting individual paths. Celibacy for some, relationships for others, but no coercion. Personal freedom is key.
So respecting that spectrum of human experience.
Exactly. He argues that being dishonest about sexuality harms yourself and that suppressed passions will just burst out eventually. True control requires real interchange, maybe even total renunciation for some.
Hmm,
And then he makes that provocative comparison a loving relationship, offering solace from pain, almost like religion does.
that's quite a statement.
It is. For him, love exists within the understanding of suffering and the dangers of craving, but, he argues, wisely recognizing craving's power can actually justify sexual enjoyment.
How does that work?
It's like understanding the power means you can engage with it consciously, rather than being blindly driven or harmfully repressive. His ethic boils down to non-coercion, non-pretension, honesty, and a real focus on female pleasure and the idea that passion, practiced respectfully, isn't inherently bad.
So honesty, mutual respect, getting rid of hypocrisy.
Absolutely. He notes desire is universal, even if people deny it. He says basically, drop the pretense during pleasure, overcome hang-ups about clean and dirty, explore openly with your partner through sex games, as he calls them.
Sex games.
Yeah, implying playful exploration. Ultimately, mutual happiness is the goal and the justification. A loving connection brought by karma is the highest ethic. Respect your partner's feelings, he stresses that. Overcoming embarrassment actually intensifies pleasure.
It sounds surprisingly modern, very relational for its time. He also gets very specific about techniques for female pleasure.
Very specific. He asserts female bliss is widespread in the body, often needs more varied stimulation. The whole area below the navel is potentially erotic.
And the techniques.
Things like direct manual stimulation of the vagina and clitoris. He mentions the rocking motion of the scrotum during intercourse, possibly providing stimulation, squeezing the base of the penis, gently wiping the penis tip across the vaginal opening. The focus is on direct, varied touch.
Very direct physical focus.
Yes. He also suggests using the penis to rub other zones, stomach, throat, breasts, and oral stimulation of the clitoris. It's all about exploring different ways to maximize her arousal and pleasure.
Okay. Let's touch on another specific area. His views on conception and the gender of offspring.
Right. He relays the common belief, drawn from Buddhist rebirth ideas, that a woman experiencing strong passion attracts a male consciousness into the womb in the intermediate state, and vice versa.
So passion determines gender.
According to that belief system, yes. Interestingly, he refutes the sort of macho idea that passionate men have lots of sons. For couples wanting a boy, he suggests choosing a passionate wife, starting sex when she's highly aroused, using rear entry. And this specific technique, the man ejaculates outside the first time, then the second time leads to conception.
Huh. Interesting ritualistic element.
Seems like it. He also says if both partners have strong simultaneous passion, a boy is likely because the woman's arousal potential is naturally seen as stronger. He also connects parental traits temperament, health being passed on based on attraction in that intermediate state.
Fascinating to see these cultural beliefs about conception, passion, and rebirth all tied together. Now, we should acknowledge, as the outline notes, that not everything in the treatise aligns with modern views. There are some elements that might seem sexist today.
Yes, that's really crucial to point out. While his general stance on equality is remarkable, some traditional male-centric biases do creep in.
Like what?
Well, linking sons with fame and riches. Suggesting lack of female arousal might lead to a daughter. Advising against sex on odd days post-menstruation because they were thought to produce girls. It's vital to see these within their historical, patriarchal context Tibetan culture at the time. But it's also fair to say these seem like minority views compared to his stronger emphasis on equality elsewhere in the text. It's a complex mix.
Understanding the context and the internal complexities. Good point. Now, he also uses various classifications, types of men and women.
Yes, quite elaborate ones. 4 types for each sex.
What are the male types?
Rabbit, buck, bull, and stallion, based on personality and physical traits.
And the female types?
Lotus, picture, large conch, and elephant, again, based on personality and physicality.
Do these line up with the Kama Sutra?
Some parallels, but also differences, like his 4 male types versus Vatsyana's 3. The rabbit man is good-natured but quick. The stallion is highly excitable. The lotus woman is delicate, less sexual. The elephant is highly passionate, insatiable.
And he combines these.
Yeah, into 16 types, like lotus or elephant conch. He even suggests different atmospheres for courting different types. It's a whole system for understanding individual differences in desire.
Quite detailed. And he uses age, too. And facial marks.
Yep, 4 age categories for women. Juvenile, youth, mature, over 50. With advice for each stage again, differing a bit from other Indian texts. And then there's a list of 19 facial moles and what they supposedly predict for men and women.
Supposedly.
He himself says they aren't very reliable. Seems more like including common folklore than a core teaching.
Right, reflecting the culture. And other physical things. Menstrual cycle?
Briefly, yeah. Classifications by vaginal position, supposed origin water, mud, dry earth, physical signs of passion. Seems like stuff compiled from Indian sources without deep personal interest. He does relay the Indian ideas about intercourse during the menstrual cycle, odd days for girls, even for boys, and the general idea of the womb being more open and fertile right after menstruation.
A mix of observation and traditional belief. And he strongly emphasizes the duty to satisfy one's partner.
Very strongly. He warns men specifically satisfy your wife's urges after conception, childbirth purification, menstruation. He even implies hellish consequences for neglect. Mutual satisfaction is clearly a major ethical point for him.
A strong sense of marital responsibility there.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, just briefly, when was the treatise on passion actually written and published?
He finished the manuscript in India around 1938. It apparently circulated in Lhasa for a while before finally being published in Delhi in 1967.
Got it. And one last detail, the text quotes the Buddha on sensual pleasure.
Yes, from the Anguttara Sutra. The Buddha talking about the ultimate beauty being the opposite sex's body, the ultimate melody being their voice, and similar points on smell, taste, touch. It shows that even early Buddhism acknowledged the sheer power of sensual attraction.
Okay, so pulling this all together, Chopel's Tibetan Arts of Love offers this incredibly rich, sometimes contradictory, but always fascinating perspective.
Absolutely. We've touched on his unconventional philosophy, his deep dive into erotic texts, those surprisingly modern ideas on female equality, all mixed with very practical advice on pleasure and even traditional beliefs about conception.
What really strikes me is his courage,
Mhm.
just tackling the whole spectrum of being, human desire, spirituality, intellect, without walling them off from each other.
Exactly. He refuses to accept those neat separations between the sacred and the profane, or the intellectual and the sensual. It's a holistic view. The key takeaway is that refusal to compartmentalize human life.
Yeah. And thinking about his emphasis on both profound pleasure and spiritual insight, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How can we bridge that gap we often feel between our physical desires and our search for something deeper?
It's a very relevant question he forces us to confront. How do these parts of ourselves relate? Can intense experience, even sexual experience, offer glimpses of insight? His work definitely provokes that kind of reflection.
Well, that brings us to the end of this deep dive. We've really only scratched the surface of Chopel's complex world.
There's so much more there.
But hopefully it's giving you, our listener, a taste of this truly original, boundary-pushing thinker. There's definitely more to explore in the Tibetan Arts of Love, so we encourage you to keep digging if this has sparked your interest.